الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is session 14 of our study on Nahw, carrying on our discussions related to the second type of Murakkab Naqis, which is Murakkab Idwafi. So we have these rules now. These are the second set of rules for this type of Murakkab Naqis. So at times there are several mudaf ilay in one construction. The middle mudaf ilay will be the mudaf of the next mudaf ilay that comes after it. Due to this, the middle mudaf ilay and the last mudaf ilay will not have the definite article and nor will it have tanween. So you know the examples of mudaf ilay that we used in the last session. This is when there's only one mudaf and one mudaf ilayh. However, this does not need to be the case. You can have multiple mudaf ilayhs. Okay. So example of this would be Babu Baytil Amiri. Babu Baytil Amiri. So if we were to split this up and just analyze it one by one, Bab over here is the mudaf. That's understood. Bayt over here, it is the mudaf, but it's also the mudaf ilayh. It's mudaf in of itself, but it's also the mudaf ilayh of bab. Okay, so it's both. It's a hybrid. Okay, and al amiri is mudaf ilayh. So this middle word over here, this middle noun, this is mudaf of al amir, but it's also mudaf ilayh of bab. So it's the mudaf of al amir, and al amir is mudaf ilayh, but it's also mudaf ilayh of bab. How do you translate this? The way you translate it is that you have of, like we mentioned in last session, you put of between each noun. So the way you translate it is, again, we said that we go this way. You don't go backwards like the Moroccan Tawsif, you go this way. So you go the door of, right? Remember, you add of, right? The door of the house of the leader, right? So over here, this is an example where we have two mudaf ilayhs. We have two mudaf ilayhs, right? This is the first mudaf ilayh, which is the mudaf ilayh of this, whilst being the mudaf of this, and this is the second mudaf ilayh. Here is an example where we have three mudaf ilayhs. Okay, so you have bab, which means a door in of itself. So this is the mudaf. Bait is mudaf of ibn, right? Bait is mudaf of the next noun, but it's also mudaf ilayh of the previous noun, so it's a hybrid. Right, so this is the first mudaf ilayh. And then you have ibn over here. This is mudaf of the noun after it, which is al-amir, but it's also mudaf ilayh of the noun before it, which is bait. So this is the second mudaf ilayh. And then you have al-amir, which is mudaf ilayh. So in this example, we have three mudaf ilayhs. Okay, and the way you would say is Babu Bayt ibn al-Amir. You wouldn't pronounce this Hamza because this Hamza is Hamzatul Wasl. So it's equivalent to a silent letter in English language. So you say Babu Bayt ibn al-Amir. How do you translate this? Again, like we mentioned, you have of in between all of these nouns. Right? I'm not gonna put it for all of these nouns, but you get the idea, right? You have of in between all of these nouns. So you again you translate this way, okay? I can't stress this enough. Right? Don't think that you translate it backwards like the Moroccan CV. No, you don't do that. So the door of the house of the son of the leader. Right? So this is how it's translated. Now we have this rule over here. You can have a Moroccan Idwafi structure where there is a cipher of one of the two components. either the mudaf or mudaf ilayh, regardless of whether the sifa is of the mudaf or of the mudaf ilayh. It will be mentioned after the mudaf ilayh. Why is that the case? This is because there is not to be any disruption between the mudaf and mudaf ilayh when it comes to a murakkab idafi. So when it comes to the mudaf and mudaf ilayh, you can't put anything in between. So you can't have like a sifa in between. So if there is going to be a sifa, an adjective of one of the two, either the mudaf or the mudaf ilayh, it has to be mentioned after the mudaf ilayh, right? So there can't be any kind of disruption between the mudaf and mudaf ilayh. So I've got two examples over here. One example is representing a sifa, an adjective for the mudaf ilayh, right? Which is this example. And this example, the second example, is representing a sifa, an adjective of the mudaf. This is the second example. So let's go through these one by one. So the first example is where there's a sifa, there's an adjective for the mudaf ilayh, which is the second component. Okay. So we have over here an example, bintu rajulis salihi. Bintu rajulis salihi. How do you translate this? Again, you go this way, and you have of in between, right? So the daughter of the pious man, because when it comes to the mudaf mudaf ilayh, you go this way. But remember, when it comes to the murakkab tawsifi, you go this way. And because our rajul is a mawsuf and as-salih is the sifa of the mawsuf ar-rajul, then you will go backwards. So you say the daughter of the pious man, the daughter of the pious man. So bint over here is the mudaf. Ar-rajul is mudaf ilayh of bint, right? It's still mudaf ilayh, but it's also mawsuf of this sifa over here that has to come in the end, remember, because there is no disruption between the mudaf and mudaf ilayh. So this sifa has to come in the end, right? So as-salih over here is the sifa of ar-rajul, okay? And it's going to come in the end anyway, because the sifa is to come after the mawsuf. But when it comes to the second example, even though the sifa is the sifa of the mudaf, it's still going to come after the mudaf ilayh, right? Because of this rule over here. Over here, it's not really that big of a deal. It's not a deal at all, to be honest, because like the sifa is the sifa of the mudaf ilayh, so no biggie. So bintu rajulis salihi. So bint is the mudaf, ar-rajul is the mudaf ilayh, but it's also the mawsuf of what? As-salih, right? The sifa of mudaf ilayh, which is the ar-rajul. So you translate it, the daughter of the pious man. Now, because we have murakkab tawsifi here, all those rules related to the murakkab tawsifi that you've learned previously will be implemented. And what are those rules? Those rules are that the sifa is to mirror the mawsuf in four perspectives: in terms of i'rab, in terms of nakira ma'rifa, in terms of singular, dual, plural, and in terms of gender. So are those rules met over here? That's the question. So let's analyze. So the sifa is to mirror the mawsuf in four perspectives. So let's look at these four perspectives over here. So we have the perspective of i'rab, right? We have i'rab. Now I'm going to tell you right now that the i'rab of ar-rajul is the state of jar because it's mudaf ilayh, and we mentioned that the mudaf ilayh is to be in the state of jar, hence why it's in the state of jar. And because of this, the sifa needs to be in the state of jar, and the sifa is in the state of jar. Okay, so that ticks off. The second one is in terms of, can I write this down with like because it's harder with the thing. Yeah, I'll just write in text. It's easier. So the second one is in terms of nakira and ma'rifa. Nakira and ma'rifa. Okay, so ar-rajul over here is mudaf ilayh. And ar-rajul is ma'rifa, we know this, right? Ar-rajul is ma'rifa, it's got alif lam, it's a mudaf ilayh. So as-salih will also have to follow. It also needs to be ma'rifa, and it is ma'rifa, right? Because it's got alif lam, right? So this ticks off. So in terms of i'rab, it ticks off, and in terms of nakir ma'rifa, it ticks off. Wait, let me just fix this. I can just delete this. Sorry, delete this and put it in English. It'll be easier for me. I'rab. And it ticks off, right? It ticks off. In terms of i'rab, it ticks off. Yeah. And in terms of nakir ma'rifa, it ticks off. The third is in terms of number. So if the mawsuf is singular, then the sifa also has to be singular. Is if the mawsuf is dual, the sifa also needs to be dual, and if the mawsuf is plural, the sifa also needs to be plural. So ar-rajul over here, this is singular, hence why the sifa as-salih needs to be singular, and it is singular. Hence why we would say that the sifa does match the mawsuf in terms of number. And last one is in terms of gender. So over here, ar-rajul is masculine, right? As-salih also needs to be masculine, and as-salih is masculine. So we've ticked off all of these rules regarding Murakkabat Tawsifi, right? This is the first example. So the first example is when there's a sifa, there's an adjective for the mudaf ilayh. The second example is when there's an adjective for the mudaf. So we've used the same kind of nouns. It's just that we tweaked it a bit, right, for the purpose, and the purpose being that this is an example where the sifa is a sifa of the mudaf and not the mudaf ilayh, like it's as so for the first example. So we have over here bintu rajulis salihatu, bintu rajulis salihatu. Okay, so this is mudaf bint, right? Ar-rajul is mudaf ilayh. As-salihatu is the sifa of this mawsuf. So bint is mudaf and mawsuf, and the sifa of it is as-salihatu, and it has to come last. Why does it have to come at the end? Because of this rule. This is because there is not to be any disruption between the mudaf and mudaf ilayh, or the murakkab idafi. So even though as-salihatu over here is the sifa of the mudaf, it can't just disrupt the murakkab idafi and coming between the mudaf and mudaf ilayh. No, it needs to come after the mudaf ilayh. Hence why it's over here. So bintu rajuli salihatu, this is translated as the pious daughter of the man. So remember, when it comes to the Murakkab Idafi, you go this way. When it comes to the Murakkab Tawsifi, you go this way. So because this is an example where there's a sifa of the mudaf, when you go this way, right? You go opposite. You go the opposite way. So the pious daughter of the man, the pious daughter of the man. Okay. Now, like we mentioned in the first example, because there's Mawsuf Sifa going on over here, the Sifa needs to mirror the Mawsuf in four perspectives. So let's check these out. In terms of i'rab, so over here, bintu, if it was in a complete sentence, then I would say that bintu is in the state of rafa, halatu rafa, and aswaliyatu is also in halatu rafa. Right? This is if this was in a complete sentence. Right? Let's just imagine it is in a complete sentence, because technically you don't have i'rab unless it's in a complete sentence, and these are not counted as complete sentences. These are parts of a sentence, if that makes sense. So bintu is halatu rafa. Right? It's in the state of rafa. As-salihatu is also in the state of rafa. Okay, the reflection of the state of rafa for bintu is with a Dhamma on the last letter, ta. And same for as-swaliyatu. The reflection of the state of Rafa is with a Dhamma on the last letter, which is the ta. So the first rule ticks off. The second rule is in terms of nakir and ma'rifah. So the mawsuf over here, which is the mudaf bint, is ma'rifah. So the sifa, which is as-swalihatu, will also be ma'rifah. And it is ma'rifah. It's got alif lam. So that ticks off. In terms of number, the mawsuf over here, which is the mudaf, is singular. Hence why the sifa over here, which is as-swalihatu, is also singular. So we know this ticks off. And the last one is in terms of gender. So bint over here, which is the mawsuf, the mudaf, is feminine, right? And as-swalihatu, which is the sifa, is also feminine. So bint over here, which is the mawsuf, which is the mudaf, is feminine, and as-salihatu, which is a sifa, is also feminine. Hence why all of these rules are ticked off.